My name is Ava Hoffman, and I was born in 1927 in Berlin, Germany. My family was like any other German family during the Depression. We lived day to day, hoping things would get better. For a long time, my life revolved around my parents. To me, they were the greatest parents, especially my father. But I would soon find out that my father was not the greatest man I thought he was. Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany in January of 1933. I also began school in 1933 and became friends with a young Jewish girl named Sarah Bloom. Hitler became the dictator of Germany in 1934. He called himself the Führer, which means supreme leader in German. The dictionary describes a dictator as an absolute ruler. Also in 1934, my father received a new job as an SS officer and became a protection force at Hitler's mass meetings in public. My mother loved him in his new uniform, but of course we didn't know then what he would become until after the war. Sarah tells me that she is worried about her parents and her family. I try to convince her not to worry, that everything would be okay. But as the days went on, she tells me that she overheard her parents discussing the family moving back to Poland to get away from the laws hurting them. I found out later on from my mom and dad that those laws were called the Nuremberg Laws. The Nuremberg Laws took citizenship away from the Jewish Germans and banned marriages between Jews and other German citizens. Many German citizens began boycotting Jewish businesses at the request of Hitler and the Nazis. My father tells me that if the Jews leave Germany, they will be fine, but that they were hurting Germans and would eventually destroy our country. I couldn't believe that someone like Sarah could do that, but my father said that she was pretending to be my friend, and that made me sad. In 1936, my father received a new promotion and entered a new division of the SS. After the war, we found out that he was one of the death head guards at the concentration camps. I remember my mother was so proud of him at the time because of what our family went through during the Depression. But after the war was over, my mother felt shame and saddened. And to tell you the truth, so was I. After the war was over, we found out that different groups of people, Jews, communists, and anyone else seen as enemies of the state, were arrested and sent to concentration camps. Here they were forced to work long hours, doing hard labor under harsh conditions. The dictionary defines a concentration camp as being a camp where persons are detained or confined. Many of these prisoners would eventually die of starvation, malnourishment, disease, or exhaustion. In October of 1938, Sarah told me that her father and grandparents had to leave Germany and move back to Poland. I asked my parents why Sarah's father and grandparents had to leave Germany, and my father said that because they were not German citizens and were illegally in Germany and were not allowed to be here anymore. My father also told me that I shouldn't be friends with Sarah anymore. I cried asking why, and he said because she and other Jews were bad and would destroy us. I couldn't believe Sarah would destroy me. But why would my father lie to me? But our friendship soon came to an end on the night of November 9th and the early morning hours of November 10th, 1938. My mother and I were listening to the radio that night, and this night would later become known as Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass. The dictionary defines Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, as an anti-Jewish violence that erupted throughout Germany and Austria because of the broken glass littered the streets afterwards. More than 90 Jews were dead by daylight, hundreds badly injured, and thousands more terrorized. Nazis had forbidden police to interfere in the destroying of 750 Jewish businesses and wrecking over 180 synagogues. According to the broadcast, there was a mob destroying Jewish homes, businesses, and synagogues all over Germany. Thousands of Jewish people were arrested and sent away. After After that night, the Gestapo, or the Nazi secret police, patrolled the streets of Germany. The Gestapo would arrest suspicious people and send them away. Where they sent them, nobody knew. When I went back to school after that scary night, Sarah wasn't there. I found out later that she and other Jewish children were no longer allowed to attend schools anymore in Germany. My father said that the Führer, Germany's leader Adolf Hitler, was making Germany a better place by forcing the Jews to leave for good. I was sad because I didn't want to lose my best friend, but my mom said that I'd make new ones. After Germany invaded Poland in 1939, all Jewish citizens in Germany were forced to leave their neighborhoods and moved into Nazi-occupied territories in Europe. My father said that they were going to live in their own neighborhoods among other Jews. After the war was over, it was discovered that these neighborhoods were called ghettos and that many lacked space and food. The dictionary defines ghettos as an unusually poor section of a city inhabited primarily by people of the same race, religion, or social background, often because of discrimination. Many Jews tried to leave Germany and other occupied German states. Many tried to seek refuge in Cuba, America, Canada, Britain, France, and Belgium. One of these times was when a ship called the SS St. Louis radioed Cuba to request refuge for many European Jews on board, but was denied. The ship sailed to Florida requesting permission to allow entry, but was denied there too, because of their quota system. Some were taken to Britain, but the rest were sent to France and Belgium, where a few months later, Germany invaded both countries and the refugees were eventually sent to concentration camps, where they would eventually die. I will never understand why no other country would take these helpless, scared individuals. After the war had ended and my father was arrested, we found out later why we had moved to WWII, Poland. We found out that in January of 1940, WWII became the site of the new concentration camp, later known as Auschwitz. It later became the most notorious extermination camp, killing over 1 million Jews and other groups in Europe. After the war, it was discovered that these concentration camps were places that the Nazis would send Jewish people and other groups to work in horrible conditions for long hours. In 1942, my father didn't come home as often as he did before, and looking back now, he seemed more depressed and withdrawn from the family. I found out later that he was following orders given to him after the Wannsee Conference, which was where multiple leaders met to determine the final solution for the Jewish question. During the conference, the Nazis made plans to round up Jews from vast areas of Nazi-controlled Europe and take them to detention centers known as concentration camps, and then later taken to extermination camps. In these camps, Jews were forced into hard labor. Without adequate food or water, they would eventually die of starvation or disease. Some were killed upon arrival, and some were killed after they were found useless to work. In the extermination camps, they were forced into what looked like showers, and then gassed to death, and then their bodies put into crematoriums where they were burnt. The dictionary defines extermination camps as a camp where prisoners were sent to be executed. After the Allies advanced into Western Europe in 1944, my father seemed a lot more nervous, and my mother and I didn't know why until after the war was over. Apparently, Auschwitz was ordered to stop its execution of Jews and destroy its crematoriums. My father left me and my mother. He may have been involved in the death marches, where Jews were rounded up and forced to march away from the advancing Allied forces at the end of 1944 and beginning of 1945. In January of 1945, the Russian army liberated Auschwitz, and an estimated 2 million people, including 1.5 million Jews had been murdered there. In April of 1945, my mother and I heard over the radio that Hitler had killed himself, and to us, the war had ended in defeat, and our lives and the lives of many others would never be the same. After the war was over, we discovered the atrocities the Nazis had done during the war. Those atrocities would later become known as the Holocaust. The dictionary defines the Holocaust as a mass slaughter of Jews and other groups of people during World War II. My mother and I left Europe for the United States in 1945. My father never returned home after the war, and my mother never wanted to see him again, nor did I. We could never forgive him for the atrocities he had committed while in the SS. After living in the United States for a few years, I read a book called Anne Frank, The Diary of a Young Girl. Anne Frank was a Dutch Jewish girl who wrote about her time in a secret annex, living with her family and 2 other families in a small cramped attic. During their time in the hiding place, she began to write a diary explaining firsthand her life and the lives of others. She writes from the time they went into hiding until the time the Nazis found them and they were deported. Unfortunately, she does die during the Holocaust of the typhus disease that spread through the camp that she had been held prisoner in, only a few days after her sister Margot Frank died from the same disease. The story of Anne Frank reminded me of my old friend Sarah, who I never saw again. I wondered if she ever knew about my father's involvement, and if she did, if she would ever forgive me. I also wondered if she survived. Sometimes I cry for Sarah and for the others like her and Anne Frank, who never got to see a world without war, hate, and fear.